Okay, I think we're going to slide right into our first session, which is on new avenues for civil discourse at MIT. I'll let Peter bring up the panel and introduce their topic.
Well, thank you. Good to be back here so soon. As I said, John Tomasi is on his way here, coming in off the road. He's on his way up from Providence, coming through that famous New England traffic and that lovely weather we've been having so much of here recently. But I'm very excited for this first session. I have had chances going back to when I was at my previous work at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression in Philadelphia. First to talk with Brad Skow and Alex Byrne from MIT's philosophy department about their early efforts at promoting free inquiry and academic freedom at MIT. And since I've gotten here, I've also had the pleasure to meet Linda Rabieh and get to know more about the work that she's doing in MIT's residential community. And so when I saw the announcement that three of them were helping to lead a new initiative focused on civil discourse at MIT, I was excited first to hear the news and see that they're going to be collaborating further. But also I knew that I wanted to be able to get them here so that we could discuss their project in a little more detail. So I'm very happy to bring up Alex Byrne, Brad Skow, Linda Rabieh. Let's get you up here and we'll take just a minute to get you mic'd. Brad, Linda, Alex, good morning, and thank you all for coming to help out with our conference today. Maybe first, if we could go down the table, if you don't mind, just giving a brief snapshot of your teaching, your research, your interest in this particular issue in free speech, promoting civil discourse, and then we can get into the rest of the discussion. But maybe, Brad, you can start.
Sure, I'll go first. I'm Brad Skow. I'm a professor in the philosophy section at MIT. Most of my research up until recently hasn't really been connected to free speech in any interesting way. I wrote a book on time. I wrote a book on scientific explanation. But I have been aware of the growing intolerance of, so to speak, heterodox views in philosophy and also in the culture more generally. So that got me concerned about this issue and led me to, among other things, create with Alex a course on free speech and liberalism that we teach, and also the project that we're going to talk about today.
Hi, I'm Linda Rabieh, and I'm a political theorist. I've been teaching at MIT in the Concourse program for 13 years. I'm a political theorist, so my courses they sort of span a bunch of different disciplines: political science, some ancient and medieval studies, we have a section on that, and also philosophy. I just want to say briefly what Concourse is and why it's, and I think, a very important program for MIT, and then just how we became connected with this civil discourse project. So the purpose of Concourse is to offer a liberal education alongside a world-class STEM education. So Concourse is actually not a residential community. It's actually a learning community, a first-year learning community. So it's a first-year learning program. We have one of the students speaking today, just by chance, is actually a Concourse alum. And this also means that, and our students continue to participate throughout. And in fact, well, we actually have two Concourse alums here. There's Sasha Rickard, who is now a PhD candidate at Boston College, but who is also a Concourse alum. So what is a liberal, what does that mean, that we want our students to have a liberal education? It means we want to cultivate students who are free human beings in the full sense, right? Liberal comes from the word free, means free, and so we want to cultivate human beings who are free in the full sense, capable of governing themselves and thinking for themselves. So liberal education doesn't provide a simple skill, a technical skill, right? They're coming to the best place in the world for that. It doesn't provide a technical skill or a way to earn a living, but rather it helps develop an understanding of human nature and thus a capacity to exercise good judgment as leaders in any aspect of life. And I'm happy to talk more about how we impart a liberal education in Concourse, what the requirements are of Concourse. So just, please ask if you're interested in that. And then I'll just say quickly how we got involved in this wonderful civil discourse project that was spearheaded by Alex and Brad. And I'll just say two things quickly. One is that I started noticing about 5 years ago. And as I said, I've been at MIT 13 years. So I started noticing about 5 years ago that it was becoming much more difficult to read the books, the challenging books that we read in Concourse, and to have the intense and challenging conversations that I think are at the core of liberal education, and I'm happy to talk more about that too if you want. Students didn't like being challenged by me. They were worried about challenging each other. They were most concerned about the possibility of offending someone, and this completely inhibited class discussion, and it was becoming extremely frustrating, and I was getting very worried about this. And then I would say what furthered that concern was the Dorian Abbott episode. But I would say what surprised me was not that my students had a very strong reaction to the Dorian Abbott episode, but actually that there was a kind of collective big shrug about it. That it was sort of blithely accepted that if there was the possibility that people were going to be offended, then of course we should rescind an offer to speak. The thought that any kind of potential unrest or uncertainty, that absolutely stopping that should absolutely trump any concern for intellectual academic freedom. And so with that on top of these other things that I'd started to notice, I began to be very concerned whether a liberal education at MIT was going to be possible. And I would say at MIT especially, with students who are going to go on to be leaders in cutting edge of science and technology, it is all the more crucial that our students, who may one day hold the levers of power, of technological power at least, that they have a liberal education, that they be able to learn how to use that power wisely and well. And so when I became acquainted with Alex and Brad and heard about their project, they very kindly thought to offer us a place in it. And I think we have a great program in mind to try to collectively address this problem, and I'm happy to talk more about what that means. So sorry for going on, but I realize that Concourse isn't an obvious thing that people know about, so I just wanted to make you aware of what we are, what we're really trying to do, and sort of set the groundwork for a further discussion. Sorry about that.
I'm Alex Byrne. I'm Brad's colleague in the philosophy section. It's actually course 24, the Department of Linguistics and Philosophy, so I can correct Peter on another point, but everyone makes this mistake. We don't officially have a philosophy department.
I know it's linguistics and philosophy.
Department of Linguistics and Philosophy. Although, for all practical purposes, these are two separate departments running their own separate graduate programs. And like Brad, for a long time, my research really bear on the issues that we're going to talk about today. I wrote a book on self-knowledge. I've written a whole bunch of stuff on philosophy of mind, perception in particular, and epistemology, the theory of knowledge. And for some reason, I can't really explain to myself, I recently became interested in sex and gender. And it's not, it turns out, not just a third rail in the culture at large, but a third rail within the discipline of philosophy itself. You wouldn't have imagined that philosophy, of all subjects, would actually have any third rails, or if it did, maybe the ethos would be, run to the third rail and stand on it as soon as you can. But anyway, that is unfortunately not the case. So my interest in this project is entirely self-serving. I just want to enlist your help to prevent me from being cancelled. So Brad and I and Linda and Anne McCants, who's in history and who's the director of Concourse, applied to the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation's. I'd never heard of. I still don't know who Arthur Vining Davis is, but anyway, he obviously had a lot of money. And we applied to the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation's for a grant to run a civil discourse project at MIT, and they gave us a lot of money, comparatively speaking. And our project, which runs over 2 years, has 2 main components. The first component is really the one that Linda has touched on, involving Concourse. Maybe Linda can say more about that in a sec. Concourse is co-opting the organization Braver Angels, which is all about bridging political divides between left and right. So that's one component directed at a narrow slice of MIT's undergraduates, and we're using the Concourse part of the project as a kind of test bed or proving ground to see what works and what doesn't, with the ambition later to roll out some of the more promising initiatives across the Institute. So that's one component. And then the other component is this speaker series. We'll have a website with all the details up shortly. And here the idea is to bring in, not crazy Alex Jones tinfoil hat-wearing types, but just very serious people with a slightly alternative point of view that you don't often hear on this campus, have them give a talk and pair that with some civil pushback from an MIT faculty member. And the talks are open to everyone, but they're really mainly intended for undergraduates, because we want to demonstrate to undergraduates, by example, that we can talk about controversial ideas in a reasonable, calm, rational way, although I guess we won't mind if people get somewhat heated from time to time, but the important thing is we're not going to shout the speaker down or anything like that. We have 2 talks this term. The first one is with Stephen Koonin, who used to be the provost of Caltech and is now at the NYU Stern School, is that right? Anyway, he used to be Obama's science advisor, and he wrote a book called Unsettled about climate change. And his view is basically we shouldn't panic too much about climate change. We shouldn't rush to net zero or anything like that. And he's going to be paired with Kerry Emanuel, who's a very distinguished climate scientist in MIT's Earth and Planetary Sciences department. And the title of that event will be Climate Change, Existential Crisis, or Bump in the Road. So that's the first one, and then the second one is a complete change of topic. We've invited this British writer, Mary Harrington, who just wrote a book called Feminism Against Progress, and the title of the event with her is has feminism made progress? So that's with Mary, and our very own Anne McCants is going to be the respondent. So we're very much looking forward to those 2 events. The first one is, I think, on October the 24th. And then next term, we have, again, 2 speakers. The first one is the epidemiologist, oncologist, wears many hats, at, I think, UC San Francisco, Vinay Prasad, who's been very vocal about COVID policies and lockdowns and so on. He'll be speaking about COVID policies in February, maybe. And he's being paired with Pekka Hosoi from Mechanical Engineering, who was MIT's COVID czar. And Pekka has been very active in the campaign to MIT more on board with free expression and took a very big role in amending the faculty free expression statement. And then the last speaker is the writer Freddie de Boer, who I'm sure some of you have heard of. He wrote a book called The Cult of Smart about education. He's a Marxist. We didn't want to there's some great danger in this particular moment of sort of stacking the deck with, grumpy old men complaining about wokeness and so on. We didn't want to do that. So Freddie is a Marxist, and his latest book is called How Elites Ate the Social Justice Movement. We have yet to pair him with an MIT faculty member, though. Oh, yes, and then there's a third. We haven't entirely forgotten about the faculty. There's a third component as well, which is a faculty seminar on free expression, which will be held next term. And this involves another of our collaborators, the Johns Hopkins political scientist Yasha Mounk, who just has a new book out, actually, on identity politics. The Identity Trap, I think it's called. And yeah, Yasha will be there. We'll also invite some people from Harvard, I think. And Yasha has a podcast called Good Fight. And our plan is to have at least some of our speakers appear on Yasha's podcast with mighty civil discourse branding.
Thank you. I think I'm going to ask a question to Brad and Alex, and then one to Linda, and then I'll open it up for Q&A from the audience. Linda, I'll start with you. I know from our discussions, one thing you have sort of experimented with in Concourse are the sort of Braver Angels-inspired debates among your students, and I'd be curious to hear, and I think the audience would be curious to hear how that's gone, how you've approached it, and maybe what plans you have for it as part of the new initiative.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So, as Alex mentioned, our component of the project is to try to get students engaged and excited about these events, and then also to equip them to feel confident about getting in the fray and speaking about these questions, that aren't quantitative and that are messy and polarized and sensitive. And, I think our students especially may tend to shy away from such conversations, and we want to get them to articulate their views, to defend their views, to be able to listen to others and engage with them. And so we are sort of focusing on having debates in Concourse that correspond to the speaker events. And we're using, as Alex mentioned, the wonderful Braver Angels format, sort of parliamentary style debate, which comes from this wonderful British Whig tradition that encourages, as you said, raucous debate, but takes this as something to be sought after, right? Takes this as something that's exhilarating and fun, and not something that we have to worry about and shy away from. So we got started in the spring semester with doing a few debates within Concourse, and first semester our plan is to hold these debates in Concourse following the speaker events, so the students get to, they will, part of the requirements for Concourse this semester are to attend the speaker events and then participate in our debates. So they will have had some prep by going to the speaker events. And then we will hold debates. But the idea is, hopefully by spring semester, that we can begin to open the debates to the broader MIT student community, with the idea being that we now have a good cohort of kids who know how to do this, who feel comfortable doing this, and once other students see this, they'll hopefully begin to feel more comfortable doing it too. And just one quick plug for Braver Angels. As we started experimenting with the debate format this spring, Peter and I have talked about this, there was a very sensitive issue that developed on campus right at the end of the year that had to do with postering. And there was a big controversy, and it turned out that one of the Concourse students, a senior, was involved in that. And, we got all these emails saying, don't talk about this. This is, we have to figure out the students. We're going to go through the process of, dealing with the student. But there was this general sense that we shouldn't talk about this issue. And Sasha and I over there, because Sasha's actually also been trained as a Braver Angels facilitator, we decided basically to just kind of throw caution to the wind. And we organized in our final seminar for Concourse, we organized a debate on the postering issue. And when we initially mentioned it, students were kind of gasping, like, are you sure you want to do this? Oh. And at the end of the year, when, we can't monitor what happens afterwards, we were thinking, they will be fine. And, we use as I said, the Braver Angels has a wonderful format. We had a few upper class students that we met with beforehand, and we went through arguments on both sides so that if in the debate it was all going in one direction, we had students who were prepared to take, another side and offer a different challenging view. And actually, as soon as somebody did that, because initially the students were kind of hesitant, but as soon as somebody did that, suddenly people, I think, felt comfortable expressing sort of an opinion that maybe was not that of what they thought was that of their peers, right? Turns out it wasn't simply the dominant opinion, but they didn't begin to realize that until they actually had an opportunity and felt like it was okay to voice it. So that I would say is the centerpiece of the Concourse part, is to try to help students feel comfortable, want to debate, and know how to do so in a productive way where they're actually interested in listening to different challenging opinions and really trying to wrestle with them. And as I said, I think kind of that's what a liberal education is all about. Is that helpful?
No, that's great. Thank you, Linda. And then for Brad and Alex, again, I think my experience with this goes back to before I came to the MIT Free Speech Alliance. I know we had talks about your development of the course you taught on the philosophy of free expression. You taught it for the first time last fall. In fact, I think my second or third day on the job, I came to one of your sessions where you had former ACLU President Nadine Strawson as a guest speaker. And I would be curious for you to talk just a little bit, about the course itself, but also, and I find this interesting, how you both noted that you came to this issue from having spent your careers doing research in other disciplines. Just how you came to develop and teach this course for the first time, how you put it together.
I mean, for me, it's one of these questions where it's sort of lost in my mind in the mists of time how exactly this all came together. But I mean, Alex and I think we're vaguely aware that we had similar views about the importance of free speech. I had sort of thought that was like everybody's view. So it was, I guess it was like leaving the Garden of Eden to realize that it actually was not that common among philosophers or among, MIT people more generally. So I thought, maybe if we teach a class on this. I think this was also in the aftermath of the Dorian Abbott thing that we talked about this. And MIT has a grant they'll give you to develop new courses. We applied for that, and we got it, so we decided we'd put it together. Is there anything more to say about the class? I mean, what's the class about? It's not just like 13 weeks of why you should believe that speech should be relatively free. We try to have a diverse range of arguments that we discuss. So the first part, we do look a lot at arguments against speech restrictions. And in the middle of the class, we take a serious look at arguments people have given for various kinds of speech restrictions, arguments that hate speech shouldn't be allowed, arguments that pornography should be restricted. And then in the last part, I mean, the title of the class is not free speech, it's liberalism, toleration, and freedom of speech. So it's the last third of the class that really takes up more of the liberalism and toleration aspect, and we talk about paternalism and what arguments for paternalism might look like. We talk about what conservatism is, a coherent political philosophy, as opposed to whatever the Republican Party happens to stand for this week might be, and what reasons philosophical conservatives might have for being against various forms of liberalism. So that's some of what goes on in the class. There was a second half to your question, though, wasn't there? Or was that the whole question?
I think you
That was
covered
it,
pretty
yeah.
well.
Is there anything you want?
In terms of how you came to have
Yeah, I was just going to add one thing, that one of the great privileges of teaching at a university, or especially a university like MIT, is that you have a great deal of flexibility about what you can teach, and no one really questions your expertise. So if you say, okay, well, I don't really know anything about political philosophy or the free speech literature, but nonetheless, I intend to teach a class on it, you will just say, fine, go ahead. So, that makes it so much more enjoyable, because, of course, teaching is always a learning opportunity for the instructor as well as the students, even more so if the instructor is literally, half a page ahead of the students in every session. So I've certainly learned a lot from teaching the class. And also, I think both Brad and I were not, though we sort of instinctively recognized that free speech was important. Of course, as philosophers, we can't go with our gut reaction. We have to have some fancy theoretical backing for these beliefs. Like, no philosopher would ever dream of just accepting the fact that there's an iPhone on the table, because he might be dreaming, so we need some fancy argument. And so I think we were both motivated by the thought that, we should really look into these classic arguments for free expression and see if they hold up, what their limitations are.
And the goal for the class is not for the students to all come out being pro-free speech, though of course that would not, in my eyes, be a bad thing, but it's not what we're aiming at. We mostly want them to be more well-informed about the debates about free speech, so that when they go out and participate in the wider culture, they say more intelligent things about it. Like if they come out and say, look, the First Amendment should be changed and there should be laws against hate speech should be constitutional, that'd be great if they have some coherent and interesting argument for that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about being on the free speech side. Well, actually, maybe it's not so great. It's related to what the philosopher Karl Popper called the paradox of tolerance. Yeah. You have to allow people who think speech should be curtailed, a platform to make their case. So, and as Brad said, we emphasize to the students, of course, education and indoctrination are two very different things, and the whole point of the class is just to allow the students the tools to make up their own minds on these issues. They don't have to come down. There's no right answer, at least as far as grading goes.
Okay, well, I see that John Tomasi has made it in from off the road. I don't even like taking the red line to Harvard Square these days, so taking a car in from Providence is above and beyond. John, we're about to probably hand it over to the audience for Q&A, but maybe I'm happy to get out of this chair. Maybe because one of the initiatives you've launched at Heterodox Academy is its new Campus Communities program, and as Brad and Alex are two of the leaders of your of the campus community at MIT, perhaps you'd like to just give a quick word about that program, and then we can go to the Q&A.
Hi, I'm sorry to all of you to be late. I'm supposed to be introducing you, not arriving at the end. I left Providence 3 hours ago, but anyway, I'm here.
We're glad you made it.
Thank you. I just passed around something that you might want to look at. On the back side is something you may find particularly interesting. It's a list of the top campuses where HXA has members. Heterodox Academy is a membership organization of professors who care about these values, and we work from the inside of universities. I think to have change happen at our universities, we have to have a combination of forces. You have to have outside groups providing pressure, and you have to have a cohort of insiders or experts on free speech, which MIT is really blessed to have a fantastic, renowned group of experts insiders. We need to build an interior core. And HXA's mission, our fundamental strategy, to restore our universities to their status, the rightful place of being esteemed parts of our institution. Our core strategy is to create or to facilitate the creation of a community of open inquiry experts on every campus in America. On the back of the list I just sent around, you'll see some of our groupings of work. We have people. The first thing, I became president of HXA in January a year ago. The first thing I did was make the membership list public, and because I wanted our members to start knowing each other and meeting each other. And our friend from Harvard called me and said, I can't believe Harvard's a place where there are the most members in the entire country. And I said to him, call your friends, start organizing, which is, you'll be hearing, I guess, they've been doing. So HXA is built out. We're interested in this. This is our mission, is to try to encourage and facilitate any way we can the creation of a community on a campus that is for free speech. We have our own campus community network. We build a module that makes it easy to build these things. But we're also interested in supporting other groups doing it in different ways too. So that's our job. I could say a lot more, but I won't, because you're talking about MIT and free speech. So let's do Q&A. And I guess I'll take questions and pretend I'm the moderator. Please.
Thanks. I'd like to ask about the status quo. When freshmen arrive, are they already, for lack of a better word, woke? Or are they, and do they get better or worse, kind of more so or less so through their 4 years?
I mean, I myself don't feel like I have much of a sense of the freshman class as a whole, so I couldn't answer that question.
I mean, Linda is definitely the expert here. I mean, I am a freshman advisor, so I have 5 freshmen who I shepherd through their first year. It's all a bit of a joke, actually, because you have an associate advisor who's typically a junior, and these people are always terrific. It's just like amazing how accomplished and nice MIT undergraduates often are, and my one is called...
Could you use the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. My one, my associate advisor this year is called Maggie, and even though I'm notionally the advisor, like Maggie is the one who knows everything. So she's really the one who tells the students, you know, which version of intro physics to take. But admittedly it's a small sample size, but my sense is that it's not really top of mind for the freshmen. I mean, they almost certainly have never heard of Dorian Abbott, and they have no idea that there's some free speech issue in particular at MIT.
Do you want to speak?
Yeah, I would, pardon me?
Please, do you want to speak to that?
Yes. No, I probably do have the most experience with freshmen since Concourse has a cohort of 50 every year. And I would agree with Alex. I think they arrive on campus with a lot of opinions that they've kind of absorbed from the atmosphere. I wouldn't say they're adamantly woke, but they come accepting certain dogmas or doctrines, which they sort of, take unquestioningly. And I would say that what I notice is more than being kind of actively or adamantly woke, they just think that they want to be decent and they want to be tolerant, and they think that means you shouldn't argue or take issue with what your fellow students are saying. So what I would just say is they misunderstand. They've lost an understanding of what, liberal education is, which is getting in the muck and down and dirty, and I don't mean dirty in an angry way, because that's, in a way, one of the most important things we have to check in our discourse is our anger, because anger is the enemy. I mean, this is what we learned from the Greek. Anger is the enemy of education. And so, but they don't understand that how you can have a friendly, exciting, exhilarating, liberating, daring conversation that, doesn't devolve into a kind of ad hominem polarized criticism of each other. That's why Braver Angels is doing this wonderful work, and we're just so happy to be a part of that. Is we want to recover the idea of healthy and, like as Alex said, vigorous and even raucous debate about different opinions. And I think that's, when I mentioned, I'll just say one more quick thing, when I mentioned that difficult debate that we had at the end of last spring, what became clear to me, and maybe this is something Adam can speak to too, is that once they sort of felt like it was okay to voice these opinions and how to do it, they did, and there turned out to be a much wider range of opinions. Sorry.
I just like to, I taught at Brown for 28 years, and I just think what you said it resonates so strong with me. Students arrive on campus, so many campuses across the country, with a kind of imperative to be nice, which is a lovely imperative, and an imperative to be tolerant and to be respectful of others, which is a lovely thing for young people to feel. And yet it's because they haven't been given this awareness that, in fact, the university is a special place. It's a special thing you're entering into. There is a thing from Plato's Academy of the idea of the university as a place apart from the city, separate from politics, separate from your family too, and your home, and those feelings of familyness and love, but a separate place to do a special thing, a separate thing. And when I hear you speak it's so beautifully, I think that's exactly right. And to me, it makes me optimistic. We're not that far institutionally from turning a switch and directing students in the right way, because they can be inspired by what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We have to convince administrators. We have to lead them gently to make that happen, to tell the students, this is what you're doing here.
And can I add one more
Please.
thing, which is another thing that I think we need to think about is we need to build a sense of resiliency, and we need to build a sense of, a kind of intellectual toughness, which I think took a hit during COVID. I feel like even if, I was seeing a trend beforehand, COVID has made students, this is a blanket statement, but, more fragile. And, we're worried so much about mental health issues that I think we've forgotten a little bit that, I think as you were saying, John, that, that part of the excitement of coming to university is to try to instill them with the thought that, yes, this is going to be challenging, and yes, I'm going to get, my opinions are going to get criticized and attacked, but wow, that's exciting, exhilarating. So I think that kind of resiliency is important.
Thank you. Please. Do you want to mention your name when you speak?
Oh, yeah, so I'm Wayne Stargard. I'm the president of the MIT Free Speech Alliance for Documented. Yes, so my question...
Ouch.
Yeah, but it's a good point. Several times.
Wow, relentless.
But we all look different on Zoom. We look way better in person.
So my question is, Linda's program certainly is aimed at undergraduates, and I think Brad and Alex's is also. But MIT's 60% graduate students. They're a key part of the community. They don't come bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Some of them bring bad habits from where they came from. What can we do with these programs to try and help expand their minds about the idea of tolerance and civil discourse?
And I'll sharpen the question before you guys answer it. Our polling shows that among the various cohorts at universities, assistant professors, associate professors, undergraduates, graduates. Graduate students are the ones who score least tolerant. They're the ones who are most likely, by a wide margin, to advocate shout-downs. So I'll just, having sharpened that question for you, what do you have to say about MIT with 60% graduate students? What do we do with this?
Yeah, I mean,
It's a good, very good question. Yeah.
that's an excellent question, and that's a particularly difficult problem because the graduate students are, for the most part, isolated in their own units and working on their own topics, and there's not the sense of community among the graduate students as there is among the undergrads. Of course, the graduate students are most welcome at our speaker series, and I suppose that they would be welcome at the debates.
Yeah, and maybe, I mean, you have graduate students, right, in the philosophy department, and maybe trying to bring them in.
I mean, I mean, that is a very good question. So one thing we could do is take some graduate students from a particular department, as it might be ours, and yeah, Brad is just imagining how that might go. And, yeah.
I mean, can I say like 30 seconds on this? The speaker series, it's not going to be advertised as aimed especially at undergraduates, and I think that each topic, is connected to some graduate program at MIT, and so if we work hard on the outreach to the grad students in that program, so you guys might be especially interested in, like for the climate change one, the students in EAPS, there's a lot of grad students there. That might be a way to try to bring them to those events and get them engaged.
Someone way in the back of you on this topic? Yes. Please, introduce yourself again. If you're Hillary Clinton or someone I'm supposed to recognize, do you mind saying who you are?
Okay, my name is I'm the co-chair of the Greater Boston Alliance for Brave Angels. So I'm very honored to be here with you, and especially when you mention people who mention our organization's names, it's kind of like a reaffirmation of our approach, right? I will make 2 points. Number one, the parliamentarian style in the debate. We all know because of the politics, there's the winds of cancel culture and the winds of political correctness. Many of us, carry anxieties and fear, distrust. So the parliamentarian style gives us a structure, how to structure and channel the fear, the disagreement, distrust, or even the animosities. When these things get structured and channeled, and then the trust by default is beginning to surface. And the connection, even I vehemently disagree with you, but then you have to control yourself with that order to see, is there a common ground possible for dialogue? So that's the advantage of parliamentarian styles. And they're very much pedagogically oriented in classroom teaching. That's why in higher education, it's very well receptive, accepted and receptive. So that's my first point. My second point is, my previous life, I was a professor too. I taught in humanities, languages, and languages and cultures. Now I'm deeply involved in cultural studies as a researcher. One of the things about liberal arts education, it is encouraging to cultivate an intellectual grounding for all kinds of human inquiries, which means we have to take upon issues, not only in ivory tower, only being conceptual. So when freshmen avoid issues because of fear, because of distrust, because of constraints of political correctness, that doesn't really help with the purpose of liberal arts education. So there has to be a marriage between the concepts and the content. So the content, say, in Linda's term, deep down, get on the ground, be dirty, quote. That part in the education, I think is very much we have to tackle on that. And why it's a conceptual thing, with the philosophers, they're much more conceptual than ordinary people, right? But that's the advantage. So if we marry them together, perhaps we can help shape the culture. So let me stop here. We can discuss more.
Thank you. I just want to note that the question about what to do with graduate students and how to move them and make them part of this is still on the table, and we should get to it. I'll just say one quick thing. On one theory of social change, what strategy is to identify the population you want to move into 3 cohorts: the people who are currently allies, the people who are reachable, and the ones who are not reachable, and then adjust strategy in accordance with that. The categories can move, right? But that's just sort of a first level move for social change theory. Graduate students may be in the unreachable category, at least some. There are always going to be some activists who are really committed to a different view of the university, and they can't be moved. We need to think about strategies given that fact. I'm not saying all graduate students are that way, of course, but at MIT, I'm sorry, so more questions. And again, I'm going to ask people to introduce themselves, please.
I'm Jim Huffman. I'm a retired law professor and law school dean for many years. And my question really relates to the graduate school question. It seems like projects like you described, Concourse, you said were 50 cohort. I don't know what percentage of the freshman class that is, but it's relatively small, I assume. It seems to me we need something beyond that. There's a risk of having these little free speech silos on campuses. And I know that John's enterprise is really directed at trying to accomplish that. But I'm just wondering what your ideas about what are next steps? How do you make this part of what used to be the core that you don't do anymore?
So I'll just say briefly that is absolutely our goal. We do not want to be just a free speech silo. But the idea is it has to start somewhere. We want to sort of develop a kind of ground level excitement about and interest in these, big speaker series events that we've been able to hold because of the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation. And so the idea is that we'll start getting practice at these Braver Angels debates, but that we will soon, or we're hoping even maybe by this spring, advertising them and opening them up. And Braver Angels is actually very helpful in developing and advertising how you do promote it across campus. Bringing in students from across campus, including, we hope, graduate students.
Aren't there about 1,000 freshmen?
Yeah, 1,100.
So we're talking about less than half
But 200.
Of 1%.
So over 4 years, we'll have a cohort of 200 students.
That's right. As Linda said, obviously the ambition is to reach all undergrads at some point, in particular all freshmen, and I'm sure John knows a lot about this. Various universities do have free speech-oriented classes or sessions for freshmen. We don't have anything like that at MIT, but it would be great if somehow this initiative enabled us to start one.
Brad, did you want to speak to this? I'll take another question.
A lot of people want to.
I will just, on that last point, I'll just add, this is one of the big things we're talking about at HXA and trying to encourage our communities to do, and our affiliated communities and our allies and other places like Harvard, to think about orientation programs as maybe an important way to begin that process of saying what open inquiry is and could be. Other questions, please, from the front row.
Hi, my name is Skow. I'm an undergraduate at Harvard, and I'm starting a free speech initiative there. And one of the issues that we are facing is it seems like there's this, unfortunately, impression that free speech is right-wing, that open discourse about controversial ideas is right-wing. So we've been using free inquiry, civil discourse, similar to HXA does. But how do you recommend branding these ideals and these ideas as something that truly is nonpartisan, which I believe that it is?
Do you want to? I mean, you asked about branding, and I'm not an expert on that sort of thing. I mean, if you can somehow convey to the people who are your targets something about the history of free speech and toleration, you can see that 100 years ago, the people who were most prosecuted under much under a regime where speech was less free, it tended to be socialists, communists, feminists. They were arrested, thrown in jail for long periods of time. And so the origins of the First Amendment as it's currently understood really is in the defense of left-wing views. And I think that message can sometimes help people feel like free speech is not internally coded one political orientation or another. But I don't know how to put that on a bumper sticker.
I'll mention a text, one text that I found extremely helpful in that exact regard. There's a book by Jonathan Rauch called The Kind of the Inquisitors, and there's a postscript to that book where Rauch talks about his experience as a gay marriage activist. All they had, he says in this postscript, was their voices. The society was opposed to them in all these different ways. American society was opposed to the gay marriage activists in all these different ways. And he describes the forces arrayed against them. But the only thing they had was this First Amendment protection. And they used that to drive this whole thing. It's the best brief, vivid account of the progressive potential in free speech. So, but the branding is a really difficult one.
There are also plenty of great historical examples in that recent book by Jacob Machangama.
That's right.
Called Free Speech.
From Socrates to social media or something.
That's right.
And I would just add that I think tying it to liberal education is an important way to approach the question, because in that understanding, being able to speak, sort of take issue with any idea, that's a profoundly radical enterprise. It's sort of anything but conservative.
And I would also just add, to go really radical, is just to be honest and create events that are truly honest about free speech. Imagine an event series that had, because free speech has been used for really repressive purposes. That's what free speech does. But to have an event where you talk about free speech on the side of bad things, and then talk about free speech on the side of, let's say, good things, we define in different ways, that's a really interesting way to open up and bring people in. How did the KKK use free speech rights? What does that mean that they use it that way? Take it head on, talk about it, investigate it. Be scholars who aren't just defending something, but are inviting people into an exploration of a concept. That's where the power really is, it seems to me. Way in the back, please.
As far as the branding, it strikes me that free speech is for the powerless. And that might be some avenue for you to look at branding. There used to be a phrase, speak truth to power, right? Free speech helps people who don't control the discourse.
Good.
It's an idea.
That's a great idea. I'm sorry, please.
Thank you. Steve Snyder, I'm an MIT alum. Someone mentioned the idea of shout-out or shout-downs, and that got me thinking about the role of the heckler's veto. And so often that seems to be, the question would be, what actions, if any, can this group or others take to try and mitigate that, which strikes me as more of an administrative issue. And if that's a topic for a different panel, that's fine.
I'm sure you want to speak to the heckler's veto, to say a bit what it is and what free speech says about it. Is it an example of free speech to shout someone down? How do you think of that?
No, that's that is not a legitimate use of one's freedom of speech to prevent other people from speaking by drowning them out. But I thought the question was more about what our plans are to avoid heckler's vetoes being implemented.
It strikes me as a pressure point to try to address this.
So there is someone at the in the MIT administration who's point person.
So we are going to have a meeting with Alfred Ironside, who's the head of MIT communications, both about publicizing our speaker events and about what to do in the event of some hecklers coming along or some protests happening. I mean, not that we anticipate such things, but be prepared, as the scouts say. So I'm we haven't had that meeting yet, so I'm not sure what measures we'll have. We'll probably have, a bunch of MIT police dressed in riot gear, like stalking down the corridor or something. I have no idea.
I've seen a poll that said that something like 20% of college administrators think that in some cases a shout down is an appropriate response to a speaker. So I'm not sure what to do with that or what to think about that, but it's something interesting about it.
I believe there was a very recent event involving Rabieh George, who's a political philosopher at Princeton, who was essentially the victim of the heckler's veto at some college where he was speaking.
Washington College.
Yeah, Washington.
Other questions, please?
Bill Silver, class of 75, course 6. 2 words I've heard most frequently today are comfort and tolerance. Now, I'm wondering if comfort and tolerance are good enough. It seems to me for science to work, for democracy to work, heterodox views need to be required, demanded. And I wonder if the panel would care to discuss.
Well, I could say something quick about that. I don't know if it directly addresses what you're concerned about, but in the free speech principle that was endorsed by the faculty last year, and you're going to hear more about that later today, it says no one should have their talk canceled, and no one should be disinvited for their views, people shouldn't be punished for expressing heterodox views on campus. And all that was to the good, but it's consistent with everything that's written in that statement that we all carefully avoid inviting any such people to speak on campus. And of course, if that was invited in the first place, no one can have their talk canceled. So nothing has gone wrong according to this statement. The statement doesn't say, we need to ensure that lots of these voices do come to campus and are heard. But I do think that is in the spirit of what the people who wrote the report want to have happen. The statement was just one part of a much larger report about free speech on campus. And so part of our goal in the speaker series is to try to get those heterodox opinions onto campus and give them a place to speak and be heard.
So I would say that those are 2 different words, and I think that my colleagues agree with me that comfort is, if you heard us say comfort, it was what we didn't think students should expect. That we don't think that what it means to come to university, get an education, sit in your philosophy classes, that's about making you comfortable. It's precisely the opposite. It's about making you uncomfortable. And that what we hope to do is remind people about why that's good, why you need to be made uncomfortable. Tolerance is a slightly different issue, and tolerance, what I would say is, as I think you put it very nicely, John, tolerance is that's liberalism depends. Our whole political order, is rooted in toleration. The issue is what I think is addressing our students' misunderstanding of what that means in the context of a university. That to be tolerant, to be genuinely tolerant, and I think this is in a way what, you get this from John Stuart Mill, which is also a point made by a previous questioner about Mill. What in a university, what it means to be tolerant is actually to take opposing views very seriously.
That's right.
It's actually to say, you know what? I assume we're all intelligent people who want to learn, and therefore I really want to hear your extreme view, and I want to put my thoughts up against it, and I want to wrestle with it. So I would say those are 2 different words, and I think that we together, correct me if I'm wrong, have a somewhat specific view about how we address each of those words.
And I'll add that on the point about misunderstandings, another common misunderstanding, unfortunately, is that the university is a free speech zone. It's actually a very specialized kind of free speech zone. And the MIT report, which I think is just the best, it's the best statement that I read by far, and I've read a lot of them. If you haven't read it, those from other universities especially, it's a model that I'm always saying to people, read that one, because it gets a lot of these deeper issues. In a university, we're like I said, that special place in a grove outside the city, doing a special kind of conversation with each other. We're doing truth-directed conversations. Speakers who come on campus have to pass a certain bar, an epistemic bar of qualification, to be ready to contribute to that conversation in a positive way. Sure, everyone should be able to speak, technically, but they shouldn't be invited to speak. Only the ones who have things to contribute to this conversation on this campus, move that conversation forward, they're the ones who should be invited to speak. That's why I think that poll about the administrator's view is kind of a bad question, because is there any time you would think someone shouldn't be allowed to speak on a campus? You might think they shouldn't be invited in the first place. But the MIT report is just masterful on these background topics that, again, people don't know. We lack expertise on campuses about what we're actually doing. And that's why we need to have these cohorts of experts. Please, thanks for waiting.
No, that's all right. Leslie Spencer, Princetonians for Free Speech.
Nice to see you again.
So this is really a question about faculty role in improving the culture on campus. In the classroom, one of the best things our little organization did was a poll of a survey of Princeton students. And what we found was a variety of points of view about free speech related issues, but one of them which was alarming was the reticence of a great many students to dare to disagree with their professors in the classroom. Many say, if you draw them out, that there's a level of indoctrination in many of the classes. So right from the start, you get this sort of tilted approach to teaching. And even in sort of beginning German language classes, there's a kind of a woke message they want you to know, and so there's an intimidation factor. And then there's also a lot of debate around faculty who are tenured versus faculty who are not. Faculty who are tenured, the theory is that they are free to say, to promote the free speech message on campus because their jobs are secure, whereas untenured, they have to worry about what they say and their chances of promotion, etc. What do you feel about faculty role in general at MIT and elsewhere, and how to improve this culture?
Alex, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. The faculty role is very important. MIT is relatively unusual in its emphasis on science and engineering. So I'm assuming that most MIT classes are not ones where there's some particular ideological message that's conveyed at the start. And of course, you can disagree with the professor about whether this theorem really has been proved or not, but the worst case scenario is the professor just corrects you and says, no, it really is a proof. You're not going to get shamed for speaking out or for asking questions. In the humanities, it's no doubt different. I don't think that is a problem in philosophy, as far as I know. It's really the only subject that I have first-hand experience of. I don't know if
Brad, do you want to speak to that?
About whether philosophy faculty indoctrinate their students?
Well, I think we know they do. But I think the question was about that students are worried about not speaking because of their profession. Our polling shows that.
I think that's, I assume you mean on politically or sensitive topics. I teach philosophy of science. I'm teaching it right now, and the students say the most outrageous things, and I say, that's completely wrong. And they're like, no, you're completely wrong. They're totally open to fighting with me about whether there's any difference between the hypothesis that the sun goes around the earth and the earth goes around the sun. Yesterday, some student was trying to convince me those are actually the same view. And I was like, despite the fact that I was telling him that was crazy, he was like, no. But yeah, I think I wouldn't be surprised if there are classrooms where moral questions come up, where students feel like, if they come out and say, well, I think abortion should be illegal and that it's murder, or if they say, I think Trump would be a much better president than Biden, they'd be totally afraid to say that in those kinds of classes.
I think...
despite the fact that large numbers of Americans share those views, it's not like...
MIT's Women's and Gender Studies program has, I think, taken an official position on abortion, so I can imagine that it would be difficult taking one of those classes if you were pro-life. Just on the tenure thing, that's certainly how it should work, that people who have tenure should use it. But to some extent, the people who are tenured are sort of selected for conformity in a way. I mean, you know, that's how you get tenure, by playing ball and towing the line.
That's hard.
Not upsetting very many people. So
on the question about student self-censorship, HAC does a big national survey on this, and one of the most striking findings of the most recent report, the most recent survey, students report that they're 3 times more likely to self-censor because of fears about what their fellow students will think about them than what they worry about their faculty. So there's often a perception on the outside, I think especially sort of on the political right, that there's these tenured radicals are like silencing in the classroom. And some of that does happen. I mean, there are certainly examples, we know lots of them, where professors do squash reasonable alternative views. But students themselves report that their real concern, the more pervasive concern, is they're worried about things they say being picked up by other students, tweeted out or whatever, and so on. So that's a really interesting problem. I think you have time for one more question. Is there someone with a burning question, or a hand's been up and I haven't seen you? There it is.
Well, I'll take this. Steve Carhart, class of 70, MIT Free Speech, Executive Committee. Before any of the panelists would care to address it, what has been the reaction of your department leadership or the MIT administration, if any, to your work, and what does that say about academic freedom here? Is there anything beyond stoning indifference, whatever color you care to add to be the difference?
Thank you. You want to?
I think it's actually been very encouraging. So our department head, or the philosophy section head, Kieran Setcher, is behind it, wrote us a letter of support. So did the dean of the School of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences, who happens to be a philosopher, Augustine Rayo. And we have been talking to the Institute Community and Equity Office, who had a related series called Dialogue Across Differences, or something like that.
Of which John was the inaugural
speaker. Of course, yes, right, John was the inaugural speaker. Yeah, so Brad and I had a very productive conversation with one person from ICO and another from Sally Cornbrook's office. And my sense is that the upper administration, perhaps they don't want to do anything, but they certainly want to be seen to be doing something slightly different. So I think we're hopeful that we'll get, administrative buy-in.
I mean, I think there's probably a diversity of opinions in the administration about what we're doing, but there are definitely several free speech related or civil discourse related activities on campus, and there are people trying to, in the administration, to get them coordinated and put them together into one bigger umbrella so it doesn't look like a bunch of isolated small activities. But I do think some people are anxious. They're worried that things will go very badly. Maybe there'll be some big protest and attempt to shout down one of our speakers, and that'll make the news, and they're afraid that would be very bad for MIT. But no one's tried to stop us, so.
I mean, just that, I'm very lucky that the director of Concourse, Professor Anne McCants, who's a historian, is completely behind this and very eager to join forces. So the Concourse program, at least, has been wholly behind it. And as far as I've experienced, it's been surprising, I think, how open and I think really excited many people seem to be about this project. So I'm hopeful.
I'll add that it's really important to encourage campus leaders when they make positive statements and take positive steps, to reward them for that and to encourage them and show that you're allies of theirs. But it's really institutional changes that matter. It's putting things into practice at orientation and at other key points as well. And there's a line from Thomas Hobbes that I'll paraphrase. Maybe you can help me when you guys. So when you hear a statement like "I'm all for free speech" from a college administrator, Hobbes would remind us, "Covenants without the sword are but empty words." Anyway, I don't mean to end on a cynical note, but there is that element. Please join me in thanking our panelists.